I never thought I would lose her, not to the finality of death, nor to the slow drift of years, but to the silent theft of her heart. At 62, I believed our marriage was a finished tapestry, its threads worn but cherished, its patterns predictable in their quiet beauty. But the heart, I learned, is a restless thing, even in the twilight of our lives, capable of unraveling the vows we thought were woven tight. It was in the autumn of our 35th year together, in the small coastal town of Camden, Maine, that I first sensed the shadow of another man, a shadow that would linger, not with the sharp sting of betrayal, but with a sorrow so deep it became a part of me, as constant as the tide. My name is Thomas, and I have loved Margaret since we were 20, when her laughter was a melody that could drown out the world's chaos. She was my anchor through decades of triumphs and trials. 2 children raised to adulthood, a hardware store built from sweat and sold for a modest retirement, a life carved from the rocky soil of our shared dreams. Our marriage was not without its storms, but it was ours, a harbor of routine and resilience. Mornings with coffee on the porch, the steam curling like ghosts in the dawn. Evenings by the fireplace, its crackle a counterpoint to our comfortable silences. Walks along the harbor where the gulls wheeled and the sea whispered secrets only the wind could carry. I loved her in the way one loves a lighthouse, steadfast, eternal, a beacon through the fog of life's uncertainties. But love, I discovered, can blind you to the cracks forming beneath the surface, to the moments when the one you hold closest begins to slip away, carried by a current you cannot see. It began with David, a newcomer to Camden, a man whose arrival stirred our sleepy town like a gust across still water. He was a painter, 10 years our junior, with silver hair that caught the light like sea foam and eyes that seemed to hold the horizon's secrets. He had bought the old lighthouse keeper's cottage on the edge of town, a weathered relic perched above Penobscot Bay, its walls steeped in salt and solitude. There, he set up a studio, filling it with canvases that captured the sea's many moods, storms of indigo and gray, sunsets, bleeding gold, waves that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Margaret met him at the library, where she volunteered twice a week, sorting books and organizing readings for the community. Her hands steady, but her heart, I later realized, restless. She mentioned him one evening of our dinner, her voice light as she described his latest painting, a tempest over the bay, alive with fury and beauty. I nodded, my mind half on the clam chowder cooling in my bowl, unaware of the seed planted in that moment, small and unnoticed, in the soil of my complacency. Their encounters were innocent at first, or so I told myself, clinging to the illusion of our unshakable bond. Margaret began to linger at the library longer than usual, returning home with a brightness in her eyes, a spark I hadn't seen since the early years of our marriage, when we danced under summer stars and dreamed of a world beyond Maine's rocky shores. She spoke of David's work, his stories of traveling the world, Morocco's spice markets, Greece's sun-bleached islands, places we had pinned on a map in our youth but never reached, tethered by mortgages and parenthood. Her words were careful, but they carried a warmth that pierced me, a melody I hadn't heard in years. I listened, my heart warmed by her enthusiasm, blind to the ache it masked, the longing that simmered beneath her smile. David began to appear in our lives like a tide creeping in, slow but relentless. I saw them at the farmer's market, standing by a stall of late season apples, their heads bent close as they laughed over some shared jest, Margaret's scarf fluttering in the October breeze. I saw them at the town's art fair, where she helped him set up his booth, her hands arranging his paintings with a care that felt too intimate, too tender. I saw them once at the coffee shop on Main Street, sitting by the window, their silhouettes framed against the fogged glass, David's sketchbook open between them, Margaret's finger tracing a line as if it held a secret only they could read. I noticed the way her smile softened when she spoke his name, the way her hands moved with a new energy, as if awakened from a long sleep. I noticed the way she tucked a strand of gray hair behind her ear when he was near, a gesture I remembered from our courtship, a sign of nervous joy that now felt like a theft. I noticed, but I did not understand. Not yet. The truth came to me slowly, in fragments, like shards of sea glass washed ashore, sharp and beautiful in their cruelty. It was in the way Margaret's gaze lingered on the horizon during our evening walks, her eyes tracing the curve of the bay, as if searching for something I couldn't give her. It was in the quiet moments at home, when she sat with a book unopened in her lap, her thoughts adrift in a place I couldn't follow. It was in the dreams that began to haunt me, dark, formless dreams, where she slipped through my fingers, her laughter echoing in a fog I couldn't pierce. I began to watch her more closely, my heart heavy with a suspicion I couldn't voice, a fear that grew like damp rot in the walls of our home. I saw the way her step quickened when she left for the library, as if drawn by a force stronger than duty. I saw the way her fingers lingered on the edge of a postcard she received, its edges worn from handling, its message hidden from me. I saw and I felt the first stirrings of a grief I had no name for, a sorrow that settled in my bones like the ache of an old wound. The guilt was not hers alone, though I wished it were, for it would have been easier to bear. It was mine too, for the years I had let routine dull the edges of our love, for the moments I chose comfort over passion, for the dreams we abandoned when life demanded practicality over poetry. I wondered if I had failed her, if my steady presence had become a cage, if my love had grown too familiar to spark the fire she now sought elsewhere. I thought of the evenings I spent with the newspaper while she sat alone, the vacations we postponed, the promises we let fade like photographs left in the sun. These thoughts gnawed at me, a quiet torment that kept me awake as Margaret slept beside me, her breathing soft and even, her face a mystery I could no longer read. I wanted to ask her, to demand the truth, but fear held me back, fear of shattering the fragile peace we had built, fear of hearing a truth that would undo the man I had become. The autumn deepened, the leaves turning crimson and gold, the air sharp with the promise of winter. Margaret's time with David grew, though she never spoke of it directly, her silence a wall I couldn't breach. She would mention a new painting, a story he had told, her voice careful but alive with a warmth that cut deeper than any blade. I began to avoid the library, unable to bear the thought of seeing them together, their heads bent over a book, their laughter a private world I couldn't enter. Yet I couldn't stop myself from seeking signs of her heart's betrayal. Each discovery a wound I inflicted on myself. I found a postcard in her coat pocket, a simple note from David, thanking her for her help at the art fair. His handwriting bold and unapologetic, a claim I couldn't contest. I found a sketch he had given her, tucked between the pages of a poetry book on her nightstand, a delicate rendering of the lighthouse against a stormy sky, its lines alive with a passion I hadn't stirred in her for years. I found a scarf in her drawer, one I hadn't bought, its fabric soft and foreign, scented faintly with turpentine and salt. Each relic was a confirmation of the love she carried in secret, a love I could neither compete with nor condemn. The weight of it grew unbearable, a stone in my chest that made every breath a labor, every smile a lie. I began to see David everywhere, not just in Margaret's eyes, but in the town itself, as if Camden had conspired to hold him close. The lighthouse, once a symbol of our quiet life, became a beacon of my loss, its light sweeping across the bay like a reminder of her longing, its shadow a mirror to my own. The sea, which had always soothed me with its endless rhythm, now seemed to mock my helplessness, its waves carrying secrets I could never unravel. The gulls' cries, once a chorus of freedom, became a lament, their wings slicing through the fog of my thoughts. I walked the harbor alone, my steps heavy on the weathered boards, my heart a tangle of love and betrayal. I loved her still, fiercely, but that love was now laced with a sorrow that made my bones ache, a grief that clung to me like damp salt on skin. I wanted to hate David, to paint him as the villain who had stolen her from me, but I couldn't. He was not a thief, but a mirror, reflecting the parts of Margaret I had failed to see, the parts that still yearned for a life I hadn't given her. The months stretched on, each one a slow erosion of the man I thought I was. I began to notice the small ways Margaret changed, the ways she carried her secret love like a hidden flame. Her wardrobe grew brighter, a scarf here, a sweater there, colors that echoed the vibrancy of David's paintings. She hummed tunes I didn't recognize, melodies that seemed to belong to a life I wasn't part of. She spent more time in the garden, her hands coaxing life from the soil, as if tending to the roses could tame the wildness in her heart. I watched her from the porch, my coffee growing cold, my eyes tracing the lines of her face, still beautiful, even at 60, her gray hair a crown, her smile a puzzle I could no longer solve. I wondered if she loved him, if she dreamed of a life with him, if the years we had shared were now a burden she carried out of duty. I wondered, and the wondering was a torment, a tide that pulled me under night after night. The moment of truth came on a November evening when the air was thick with the scent of rain and the town was hushed under a gray sky heavy with secrets. Margaret had gone to the library, or so she said, but I knew, with a certainty that clawed at my chest, that she was with him. I followed her, my heart pounding, with a mix of dread and resolve. My footsteps muffled on the wet pavement, my coat heavy with the weight of the coming storm. I found them at the lighthouse, standing on the cliff's edge, their figures silhouetted against the churning sea, the wind whipping their clothes like flags of surrender. They weren't touching, but the space between them was alive with an intimacy that needed no words, a connection that burned brighter than the lighthouse's beam. Margaret's scarf fluttered in the wind, her face turned toward David, her expression one I hadn't seen in decades, open, unguarded, alive, with a joy that belonged to him, not me. I stood in the shadows of the pines, unseen, my breath caught in my throat, my heart breaking under the weight of what I witnessed. The rain began to fall, cold and relentless, masking the tears I hadn't realized were streaming down my face. I wanted to confront them, to demand answers, to shatter the moment that had stolen her from me. But I couldn't move. I saw, in that moment, the truth of her heart, and it was a truth I had no right to challenge, no power to change. I turned away, the rain soaking through my coat, the town a blur of lights and shadows. As I stumbled home, the harbor was empty, the boats swaying in the storm, their masts creaking like the bones of my resolve. When Margaret returned that night, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her eyes bright with something I couldn't name. I said nothing. I couldn't. To speak would be to shatter the fragile thread that still bound us, to admit that our love, though real, was no longer enough to hold her whole. She sat beside me on the couch, her hand resting near mine, and I felt the distance between us, a chasm as wide as the bay itself. I wanted to ask her if she loved him, if she dreamed of a life I couldn't give her, if the years we had shared were now a shadow she longed to escape. But the words stayed locked in my chest, heavy and unspoken, a burden I would carry alone. The years since have been a slow unfolding of acceptance, a quiet surrender to the truths we cannot change. Margaret never left me, not in the way I feared. She remained my wife, our life a continuation of its familiar rhythms. Coffee on the porch, the steam rising like memories. Walks by the harbor, the gulls' cries softer now, less accusing. Evenings by the fire, its glow of fragile warmth against the cold of our silences. David stayed in Camden for a time, his presence a quiet ache in my heart, his paintings a fixture in the town's galleries, each one a reminder of the love I couldn't extinguish. But he eventually moved away, his cottage sold to another artist, his canvases fading from the town's memory like footprints washed by the tide. I don't know if Margaret ever saw him again, if their love was consummated or merely a longing that burned bright and then faded, a flame starved of air. I never asked, and she never told. Some truths, I learned, are better left in the shadows, where they can neither heal nor destroy, but simply exist, a weight we carry until the end. Our children are grown now, their own lives a tapestry of joys and struggles, their visits a light in our quiet days. Our grandchildren, 3 of them, are a new chapter, their laughter a melody that fills the house, their small hands tugging at my heart. Margaret is still beautiful to me, her gray hair a crown of silver, her eyes still holding the sea's secrets, though they no longer search the horizon as they once did. I love her, perhaps more deeply now, for the flaws we've both carried, for the silences we've chosen to keep, for the life we've built despite the cracks. But there are moments late at night when the house creaks and the wind howls that I feel the weight of those unspoken things. I see her standing on that cliff, her face turned toward another man, and I wonder if she carries him still, a ghost in her heart as he is in mine. I wonder if she dreams of what might have been, if she regrets the life we chose, if she loves me as I love her, fiercely, imperfectly, with a sorrow that lingers like salt on the tongue. The years have softened the edges of my grief, but they have not erased it. I find myself returning to the harbor, my steps slower now, my knees stiff from age and weather. The sea is still there, its waves a constant, its surface a mirror to the secrets we keep. I walk its shores alone, the gulls' cries a chorus to my thoughts, their wings slicing through the fog of memory. The lighthouse stands as it always has, its light sweeping across the bay, a beacon that guides ships home, but cannot guide me to the answers I seek. I think of Margaret, of the woman who laughed under summer stars, of the woman who stood on a cliff with another man, of the woman who sits beside me now, her hand near mine, her heart a mystery I will never fully know. I think of David, a man I never truly knew, but whose shadow shaped the man I became. I think of love, of its power to bind and break, to heal and haunt, to endure through the weight of all we cannot say. I am Thomas, husband, father, grandfather, keeper of a love that has endured through loss. Our story is not one of grand gestures or dramatic endings, but of quiet moments, of choices made and unmade, of shadows carried through the years. The sea still calls, its voice a whisper of all we've lost and all we've held. And in the quiet spaces between who we are and who we might have been, Margaret remains, my home, my heartbreak, my forever unfinished song.